Hi, I'm Nick Malowick, and welcome to An Evil Mind, a video crime fiction blog from Xenobooks. Before I discuss who we're going to talk about this week, I do want to say that I am just kicking my own ass for doing Rex Miller last month, because I should have saved all the serial killer novelists for this month, because Halloween, and really the only crime fiction and horror mainly intersect at the serial killer novel. Just speaking personally for myself, I'm fairly sick of serial killer novels and movies. I wrote one of a sort, The Monster's Cradle, but I think it's kind of a worn out genre at this point, although there are still people apparently, trafficking in that. And what we're going to talk about today, though, is someone who traffics in it infrequently, and that is Thomas Harris, who wrote Black Sunday, Red Dragon, Silence of the Lambs. And boy, that's just a 1-2-3 punch combination that spread out over 15 years, because Black Sunday comes out in '75, and Silence of the Lambs a little later. A little later than I'm not actually certain of the exact year on that. I'd have to look at it, but those are followed up with far weaker novels, and we'll get to that in a couple of minutes. There's not a lot of biographical information on Thomas Harris. According to Wikipedia, at least, he has not given an interview since 1976, which would have been publicity for Black Sunday. Black Sunday is, not a serial killer book, incidentally. It's more of like a straight suspense thriller, and a very particular kind, from the 1970s. Obviously there were, terrorism, hardly anything new, but the 1970s sees the rise of Mideastern terrorism, when that proves to be something of a boon for suspense, thriller slash action slash crime, both novelists and filmmakers, and actually also there's also a lot of European terrorism at that time. You're getting like Bader Meinhof gang, the IRA, obviously, Red Army faction. Those guys, I think there's Italian guys. But there's also, it seems like there was a Japanese terrorist group around then with a similar name. But then there's also Black September, which murdered athletes at the Munich Olympics in '72. There's the PLO. There's early, I believe, early version of Hamas back then. And they provide very colorful, larger than life villains. And then of course there's also the real life. Hijacking of the Lufthansa airliner that the Israelis recaptured in Entebbe airport in, I believe, Mogadishu, Somalia. So Harris gets into this relatively early, though. He's one of the guys that gets on that terrorism subgenre. Or Black Sunday concerns an American Vietnam veteran and blimp pilot and helicopter pilot who lost his mind after being captured and tortured by the North Vietnamese. He wants to commit an act of mass murder, but he needs assistance both in terms of some technical assistance, personnel, and materiel. So he hooks up with a Mideastern terrorist group, which furnishes him with someone who is more or less a minder and coordinator, because this guy, while he's a pilot and he is holding down a day job flying the blimp for a fictional company called Aldrich, he is also psychotic. He has poor reality testing, as they say. So he builds this bomb, a gigantic plastique powered nail bomb that he's going to hang underneath his blimp. He's going to go over the Super Bowl and he's going to set it off, and basically a gigantic Claymore anti-personnel mine strapped to the bottom of this blimp. And also, of course, the president, just to add another layer, the president's going to be at the Super Bowl. and really the only guy who's on to him is a Mossad agent. The movie version of this is also good. Neither book nor the movie set the world on fire. The book sold well enough that Harris had another book, Red Dragon. We'll talk about that in a second. But the movie, though a critical success, did middling commercial business. But like I said, he had enough that he was able to quit his job. He worked for the AP in New York at the time, Harris did. So then he writes Red Dragon. Red Dragon is a jump forward as a writer. There's absolutely nothing wrong with Black Sunday. Recommend it highly. But he becomes a better writer by leaps and bounds, and Red Dragon's a good one. And that is where we introduce the character of Hannibal Lecter, although not in the way that he was not the Lecter that he would become. The protagonist, Will Graham, is a former profiler and homicide detective who worked for the FBI, had to quit the FBI after capturing and indeed killing, rather more accurately, another serial killer early in his career. But he is also the guy who caught Lecter, and Lecter damn near killed him in the process, stabbing him with a scalpel. But, this is where we get the first of the scenes where somebody has to go talk to the crazy incarcerated serial killer. And this has been ripped off a few times. So Lecter is a relatively minor character in the book, although he is a mover of the plot. At one point, finding out enough personal information about Will Graham, who is the former FBI agent, to sick another serial killer, Francis Dolarhyde, the Tooth Fairy, onto him. And that's not giving away too much in the book, although there have at this point been two versions, one called Red Dragon, one called Manhunter, starring William Peterson and directed by Michael Mann back in the 80s. Red Dragon is probably a better adaptation of Red Dragon, the book. Manhunter is probably more fun. It's early William Peterson in his kind of crazy mode, or at least his hyper-intense mode that we would also see in To Live and Die in L.A. But it's a much better written book, and it is where we start to see that when he's writing about the serial killers, and he's writing about the people in the behavioral science unit of the FBI who, seek to capture these killers, Harris traffics in a form of, I would say, myth, fantasy, almost hyper-violent fairy tales, and his writing style reflects this. It is a very personable style where he's an omniscient author, writing in the third person, but he is directly addressing the reader. It's like someone telling you a story, and it is often smooth, mostly in the present tense, which is a difficult style to pull off. I don't frankly know if I'd have the guts to write a novel in the present tense, but Harris does, and Harris makes it work. So Red Dragon does a lot better as a book, and that's on the rising edge of the serial killer novels, of which there were a buttload in the 1980s. The serial killer is one of your primary boogeymen of the 80s. Stephen King, wrote about Dead Zone as a serial killer case as an important piece of its plot. It is in fact the thing that sends King's protagonist Johnny Smith in the novel onto his path, his hero's journey, in a manner of speaking. So Harris follows that up with The Silence of the Lambs, which is his best book to date. That is his apogee. Now, is there going to be another book? Again, according to Wikipedia, there's going to be one in 2019. We will see. Thomas Harris is no kid. He was born in 1940. He's damn near 80. If he's going to crank another one out, this is the time to do it. Silence of the Lambs, you've seen the movie. Probably you've read the book. If you haven't read the book, now go buy it, download it, whatever you got to do, read it. This is one of the ones I cannot recommend highly enough. Dr. Lecter becomes a much more active force in this because somebody makes the very foolish error of removing Dr. Lecter from his basement cell in the Maryland crazy house in which he has been incarcerated since being captured by Will Graham. And if you haven't seen it, if by some miracle you haven't seen the movie or read the book, and the movie, big movie. I mean, for a movie of its type, I don't think anyone expected it. But it was also a very successful book as well. Movie won a truckload of awards. But I don't want to get too far into its plot on the off chance that you're not familiar with it. I don't want to screw that up for anybody who's coming to it cold. Just know that read Red Dragon first. They are of a unit. Where we start to have a little bit of problem is what happens after Silence of the Lambs. So it's followed up with the sequel, Hannibal. Hannibal's, in my opinion, just my opinion on mileage may vary, nowhere near as good a book as Silence of the Lambs is. It was inevitable. Okay, Silence of the Lambs, something that big, it's gonna have a sequel. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. There's no way this could have been dodged. And the book traffics, to my thing, largely in the destruction of Clarice Starling, and leaves us on a bit of a cliffhanger. We don't exactly know what happens to her or Dr. Lecter, who, since the end of Silence of the Lambs, has been roaming the world free and killing as he will. And his whims are his whims. Where the book goes wrong is making Hannibal into something of a superhero. Again, like I said earlier, there's myth at work in Harris's books, and we see this definitely in Hannibal, where Lecter is like an advanced form of human. He becomes the protagonist in the book in and I think that's unpleasant. He changes Lecter's moral outlook, and the same thing happened. I remember I talked about Rex Miller. The same thing happened with Chain Gang Bunkowski, his serial killer. Eventually, if you want this character to become the central force in these books, you have to make him a little more palatable. And he does this with Dr. Lecter. Lecter is a maniac. I mean, he kills because he likes it. He eats people because he likes it. Now, we start to get his origin story in Hannibal, and we see, maybe what made him this way, and that's fine and dandy. Serial killers in fiction and real life generally come from horrible beginnings. Definitely, abusive, terrible things happen to them as children, and this is why they are what they are. But then we also get into this nonsense with Lecter, where he kills on Starling's behalf, and he kills people for being rude. He understandably kills an Italian police detective who is a direct threat to his freedom. But he becomes more like Jason Voorhees in that you root for him sometimes against his victims. And again, Miller did this too. I find that repugnance too strong a word. That's a bit melodramatic, but I don't like that. These are the serial killers are the bad guys. There should be no redemption of them. There should be no time in the narrative where you take their side. That's just how I feel about it. James Ellroy's serial killer characters. At no point do you, and he did a bunch of theirs actually in, I believe, now that I'm thinking about it, in every single book of the L.A. Quartet, there's a serial killer, running around in the novels. He's not always the main bad guy of the novels, but he is definitely present in all those. But at no point in those do you feel any kind of sympathy for them. They're scum. They're meant to be captured or exterminated by the protagonist, and to my way of thinking, that's how it should be. And this takes us up to the most recent, which not particularly recent at all, of Harris's books, Young Hannibal. Now, this book kind of came to be under difficult circumstances. Reportedly, Dino De Laurentiis owns the movie rights to these characters, Hannibal Lecter and Will Graham, and he basically told Harris, at least as the story goes, that if Harris didn't write him an origin story for Hannibal Lecter, De Laurentiis would go out and find someone who would. So really, he writes Young Hannibal under duress, and it shows. It's not a very good book. And I don't know if he cared that much. I wouldn't, if that origin story for the book is true, he did not write it for mercenary reasons. He wrote it because he got strong-armed into writing it, and I sympathize. This is a legal entanglement, and Harris is not the jerk here, but it's not a good book. I cannot say that I think it's worth anyone's time. Hannibal has high points. It is Grand Guignol. It is a melodramatic book. Certainly, it's bad guy, the guy in the book who is supposed to be more repugnant than Hannibal Lecter, who eats people. Is a guy named Mason Verger, and he's garbage. I mean, there's no word for it. He's a pedophile, which I guess if you want to say in Hannibal Lecter's favor, Lecter is not. But man, that's a pretty fine distinction between pedophile and cannibal. That's a tough balance. So, obviously the recommendation is the first 3 books. Bang 'em. Without reservation, read those. Assuming you like the first one, but start with Black Sunday. There's absolutely no reason not to. It is separate from the Hannibal Lecter mythos, but it is a good one. Like I said, and read the 2 other books. If you like those, read Hannibal. It is not a waste of your time, but I think it is a heavily compromised book. Young Hannibal, you don't need to worry about it. You're fine. And if you like them, the movies are good. I think Red Dragon's a good movie. I don't like it as well as Manhunter, but Manhunter is incredibly stylized. If you like other Michael Mann stuff of that era, like, Miami Vice is partly his. But Manhunter is aggressively 80s. That's what I will say. But if you've seen other earlier Michael Mann movies like Thief, go ahead and watch it. It will not disappoint you. And like I said, William Peterson's performance is great. Dennis Farina's performance is great. He's a very different FBI boss than Scott Glenn would be in Silence of the Lambs. But he's good. Silence of the Lambs, the movie, of course, get that. Hannibal the movie, whew, boy. That would really depend. If you really like Hannibal the book, go watch Hannibal the movie. But man, if I think that book is compromised, I think its adaptation is much more so. Although Gary Oldman's kind of fun as Mason Verger. So I got to figure out if I'm going to do some kind of other serial killer book roundup. There's a few things I have in mind. I don't know that there's another single serial killer author that I might focus on for another show here as the month comes up, but I am definitely trying to find some things that are like the intersection of crime and horror, or supernatural things. There are certainly supernatural themes and occurrences in Andrew Vax's books, starting with Sacrifice, and he gets more into that stuff as he goes. But I've already talked about Andrew Vax, so I don't know what we're going to do, but thank you for watching this. As always, there are sales links down in the description. Obviously, it's a little easier on me to prep that this week because Thomas Harris didn't write all that many books. But his books will be there, and my books will be there, and I will talk to you in about a week. And as always, thank you again for watching this. Follow the channel, sign up for notifications, and I really appreciate you guys. I will talk to you later.